All right, your mailbag questions. We got the very first one. A couple of people had questions about Drake Maye. This one comes from Brodus Operandi. Was Drake Maye ever in any real danger? Oh, here we go. Was Drake Maye ever in real danger of being ruined by starting too soon behind an O-line that wasn't ready for him? Or do great players simply make their teammates great as well? And anyone who gets ruined by their situation just never destined for success?
Ooh, I like that, Andy.
I think there's no true ruining. Like, there's no true guys rise above if they were meant to rise above.
Correct.
But you can be in a situation where it's not helping your development. Like, there can be no positive to playing this year, and especially when you factor in the injury risk that could happen for a guy like Drake Maye behind that offensive line, to where, yeah, if he was going to fail, like if it was not going to work out for him, I don't think it necessarily mattered the situation. But I do think that a guy playing behind a really bad offensive line can just get set back a little.
Yeah.
Like, it can set you back in terms of how you play the game.
At the very least, delay you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
it's not worth the risk.
You can alter somebody's progression, to your point.
There you go.
But in regards to if they truly ever had it, like, it won't hurt them in the future in regards to being a good or great player. Right. And I think that was my thing. Some of the things I was worried about with Drake Maye. Yes, obviously the offensive line and the lack of talent in regards to some of their playmakers on offense, but it was some of his mechanics. That was the issue for me. But watching preseason game, it looked like he was working his butt off this all season. Yeah. And he looked really good during preseason. I think his head coach even, mentioned that. He was like, at the end of training camp, he was playing at a high clip, but you could tell that they almost made the move to start him right away, but they decided, let's sit back, let him learn a little bit more. And they felt like this was the time to put him in. I will say this kid is tough. I mean, because he was getting hit left and right, kept getting up, never complained. We saw his mobility come into factor. And then what we hadn't seen from the Patriots was them push the ball down the field. And we saw that with Drake Maye. We saw the big arm, that touchdown catch to Kayshon Boutte down the right sideline. That's what Drake Maye is going to give you. I'd say keep him in there. He needs to build that rapport with Demario Douglas, with Jalen Polk, who I believe only had like 1 or 2 targets, which I was a bit surprised about that. But I think they also need to start throwing Javon Baker. And I know Kendrick Bourne is coming back from injury, and they're slowly working him in. But I think when you take a guy in the 4th round, and it seemed like him and Drake Maye really had a rapport throughout training camp and throughout preseason, they need to play him a little bit more as well.
I wonder what the conversations were like inside the building, because, we've talked about the offensive line wasn't good enough. Keep Jacoby Brissett out there. He's going to wear it for this team this year. I wonder if Drake Maye was kind of like, hey, man, I've been doing pretty good in practice, and I see Jacoby's getting, the crap kicked out of him every week. And it's not an indictment on Jacoby. Yeah. It's an indictment on the situation, which is what Brodus Operandi said. And I think that if a guy has that it gene in between his ears, there's really nothing you can do as a coach but just take your hands off the training wheel. But, take the training wheels off and say, you think you can ride the bike? Go ride the bike, man. And we had Matt Ryan in this week, and he said, Drake Maye did a really good job.
He did.
I believe a former MVP. I believe you too, but I really trust him. And he said, delivering that ball down the field, that's the difference between him and Jacoby Brissett.
Correct.
And for Drake Maye, you go out there and you have a couple of those good plays, and your confidence goes even higher than it was before. To your point about the technique and experience, it's going to come with time, but you don't get that unless you're playing. Me and Mike were like not really bananas about Drake Maye playing behind this offensive line, but after you see him, you're kind of like, I understand.
Let him have it.
I'm okay with
that.
Way to get better. Like, I loved him coming out. This class was
we don't want to mess up a really nice toy, though. Yes. It's like a model airplane, and maybe they don't know how to fly it.
And we've seen it, I just keep going back to Patrick Mahomes. If he didn't have to play his very first season that wins the MVP, does anyone,
Lamar didn't play until late in his first season.
And literally his second season is still his best season, Patrick Mahomes. So it's not like he's developed this next chapter. And now they've won Super Bowl since then, but it's like, when you got it, you just want him to hit the ground with the best possible.
Don't lose it. Don't lose your it factor.
Correct.
There's a million guys out there with physical gifts. Okay. The things that make professional athletes different is what's between the ears, 100%. In my opinion. Okay. They can find a dozen guys walking the street that are built like me and Lee J, but me and Lee J were probably willing to do some things physically and mentally that those guys weren't able to do, and 100%. Emotionally. So you trust a guy like Drake Maye to go out there and do well. Obviously, they've seen emotional, physical, intelligence, and strength, and we like this guy a lot. And he's going to get better.
All right, next question also about the Pats. Most ideal offseason for the Patriots with the premise Drake Maye is the guy. So they got $136 million cap space. They got
That's nicey.
Spend it on the O-line.
Yeah, I think
I'm motivated.
Now, I don't love the idea of doing what the Panthers did, which was let's spend $100 million on one guy.
Two guards. Good Lord.
And it's like just give yourself depth.
Correct.
It's like a starting spot.
Get solid players in.
So I like 3 guys who can start in the NFL.
Correct.
Give
solid
yourself
players.
that baseline. They don't have to pay $25 million for one high-end guard, but sign a bunch, right? Names I threw out were like Mekhi Becton, Walker Little. Sign guys who can like play in the league, who just like, they're fine. They're not going to cost a lot. It gives you just that flexibility. And if you are going to spend some cap space, I think T. Higgins would be like a nice start. If I'm like,
dude,
to pair with Drake Maye, I don't
hands.
always advocate, but that's a guy that
mismatch.
Sometimes you got to overspend.
Exactly. Sometimes you do, especially when you would be a perfect compliment to Drake Maye. And like, maybe he's a little off target at times, but he's the guy you give chances to that can make those plays the catch point. And then in the draft, I think you're destined for a top 5 pick. You're praying that someone needs a quarterback and that you can trade back for
Correct.
Because it's not just one T. Higgins and 3 offensive linemen that takes you to the promised land. It's like an entire roster overhaul in terms of just like replenishing of talent. So that's what I'm hoping for them. And then take one of the top tackles. I mentioned Will Campbell, LSU. So
to your point, I think Adam Peters did a masterful job in doing exactly what you talked about, right? He didn't get like the big name offensive and defensive lineman, but he got vast numbers and they're all quality players. Now, the only thing that kind of sucks about it, a lot of those dudes are on 1-year deals, so you're going to be in that predicament again next year. But we've seen it pay dividends for Jaden Daniels, and now that defense is starting to come along as well with Dan Quinn because they're all solid players, like no big names, but like you said, starters in the NFL. You just got to get talent on your team and on your roster right now.
That's what they did with their O-line: Andrew Wiley, Nick Allegretti.
Exactly.
These aren't all pro players, but they're guys who have played in the league. They've been starters. They've won football games. 2 of those guys have won Super Bowls. That stuff is really, really important, and it trickles down to the rest of your roster too.